Morning. We're here on the bottom of Daf Gimel Amud Aleph. And the Gemara was wondering, in the light of the Mishnah, that Bezdin penalized those who have violated Kelayim by declaring their fields as Hefker, based on the principle and the halacha of Hefker, Bezdin, Hefker, from whence do we derive Hefker, Bezdin, Hefker? And the Gemara quoted a drasha based on a pasuk in Ezra, when he gathered together the people and he warned those who would not show up within 3 days, their fields would be confiscated. And the pasuk says, Kol asher lo yavo l'shloshes hayomim ke'atzas hasarim v'hazkenim yechram kol rechusho. And this phrase, Yechram Kol Rechusho, indicates that Bezdin was mafkir than nechasim. Those who deserve this penalty because they didn't show up and comply with the mandate of Ezra. And then the Gemara goes on to discuss whether Hefker, Bezdin, Hefker goes as far as to remove the Chi of Trumas and Maisros, because the halacha is that Hefker is poter min hamaser. And the Rash Sirleo, as we mentioned yesterday, understood that the Gemara vacillated between a case where a person is mafkir his own nechasim, as opposed to when Bezdin is mafkir his nechasim, because whereas in the former, we're dealing with a Hefker Gamur, as opposed to the latter, which is only rabbinic in nature. It is a D'Rabbanan, that D'Rabbanan now are being mafkir. And who says, that's what the Gemara is vacillating about, that D'Rabbanan's Hefker could undermine and disqualify an Isur Doraisa of Tevel. Once you have an Isur Doraisa of Tevel, are the Rabbanan authorized to remove an Isur Doraisa? We know that Yesh Koch B'Yad Chachamim Lakar Dovim in Torah. For example, they could declare that there's no mitzvah of shofar on Shabbos. Rosh Hashanah coincides with Shabbos, or this coming Shabbos in Yerushalayim. There's no Kriyas HaMegillah. But that's only in D'Rabbanan. That's not a problem. That's Heim Omru v'Heim Omru. But I'm talking about shofar Doraisa. Lulav Doraisa, if the first day of Sukkot coincides with Shabbos. But Ein Koch B'Yad Chachamim Lakar Dovim in Torah B'Kum Vaseh. The Rabbanan are not authorized to allow us to violate a lav actively. And in the case of Tevel, to allow us to eat Tevel, that would not be permitted. And on a Doraisa level, unless the Hefker would be Chal to remove the Isur Tevel is in place. And how could the Hefker of the Rabbanan be powerful enough to remove an Isur Doraisa of Tevel by declaring it Hefker? And Hefker is poter min hamaisros. That's the way the Rash Sirleo learns this sugya. Now, yesterday, after they finished here with this balagan here, it's not totally finished, but at least we have a floor. So I was able to get access to the Encyclopedia Talmudit, which I haven't seen in like donkey's years. And he has a whole piece here, a beautiful piece. I mean, I only read through about a third of it, maybe less than a third of it. I see it goes on and on. It's called Hefker, Bezdin, Hefker. I wanted to share with you a few points that I found here that I thought were very interesting. The first point is that although we here in Masechet Shekalim are answering the question of what's the source in the Torah for Hefker, Bezdin, Hefker derived from Ezra, we're only getting a partial perspective. And this is the perspective of Rabbi Yitzchak. However, the Gemara quotes Rabbi Lazar in the Bavli, and this is in Masechet Yevamos on Daf Pei Tes Amid Beis, and in Masechet Gittin on Daf Lamed Vav Amid Beis, and Rabbi Elazar has a whole different source from whence we derive Hefker Bezdin Hefker. And he derives it from a parsha in Yoshua regarding Chalukas HaNachlos. And after the 14 years, when they divided up the land, so the pasuk says, Eila HaNachlos Asher Nachlu Elazar HaKohen v'Yoshua bin Nun. And then it says, listen carefully, V'Roshei Ha'avos Lematos B'nei Yisrael. Now, we have a concept which is already in the Bible called Roshei Hamatos. But here it says Roshei Ha'avos Lematos. What is the extra word Ha'avos? Roshei Ha'avos Lematos. So Rabbi Elazar derives from that, Ma Inyan Roshei Eitzel Avos. We have Roshei Hamatos, but what does that have to do with Avos? Lo Ma'lecha, Ma Avos. Manchilim es b'neihem kol ma sheyirtzu. A father has the right during his lifetime to divvy up his Yerusha's inheritance amongst his heirs in any way he chooses. Af roshei hamatos manchilim es ha'am kol ma sheyirtzu. Now, amongst the Rishonim, we have a division. We have a whole list of Rishonim, starting with the Rambam, going on to the Rosh and the Smag, and others who derive Hefker Bezdin Hefker, like our Yushalmi, from Ezra. And then we have a whole long list of Rishonim, starting with Rashbam at the end of Baba Basra, and the Rashba and Chuvas, and the Rivash, and others who derive Hefker Bezdin Hefker, like Rabbi Lazar, from Chalukas Nachlos. Now, he quotes the Dvar Avram. I don't know if you're familiar with the Dvar Avram a little bit. He died during the Shoah. He died before the Nazis could kill him in ghetto, in the Warsaw Ghetto. Some say that he was the rabbinic force behind the uprising in the ghetto. Again, in the yeshivas, there's a whole pluk about this, but in any event, that was the Dvar Avram. He was very enamored with the Rav when they met in Europe before the war. Anyway, so the Dvar Avram claims that the source for Hefker Bezdin Hefker is very relevant. And it indicates two different approaches to Hefker Bezdin Hefker. Because he says, if you look carefully at the pasuk that we have in our Gemara from Ezra, it says, Ka'atzas, I'm going to skip a word deliberately, Hazkenim. Now, Hazkenim is a reference to Bezdin, but it also says, I'm going back to the word I skipped, Ke'atzas hasorim vazkenim. And the Dvar Avram wants to make a big deal about the extra word sorara, sorim. Now, the noun, or I should say the enterprise of sorim is called sorara. And he claims that the authority of Hefker is vested not only in Bezdin, but also in something called Sorara. He gives a beispiel, he gives an example of something called Dina de Malchutza Dina. Again, when we say Dina de Malchutza Dina, we're not talking about Bezdin. We have other mitzvahs like Lotasur that oblige us to comply with the rules or the decisions of the Bezdin. But now we're talking about something that's not Bezdin, but Sorara. It's a sovereign rulership that has authority. Now, in the case of a melech, for example, he has far-reaching powers. He can actually take money and karka and land and just appropriate it for purposes of the government. And if he wants to build a bridge or a road, he can clear out the many powers that are vested in the melech. And he claims, the Dvar Avram, that if you accept the derivation of Rabbi Yitzchak, which is here in the Yerushalmi, and that is that we derive from the pasuk in Ezra, the power of Hefker here is not Bezdin b'toras Bezdin, but Bezdin as another form of Surara. So an event, for example, that there is no Melech, like at the time of Aliyah of Ezra and Bayesheni, what you have instead of the Malchus is the Bezdin. And it's very interesting because, again, we're not going to go off on a tangent as far as the power of a Melech is concerned, but there are two dinim in Melech. There's Melech through Minui, and then there's Mishpat HaMelucha. So, for example, with the modern poskim want to ask whether or not the state of Israel has any halachic significance. So it doesn't have a din melech in terms of gavra. You don't have a minui melech, but you have mishpat hamelucha. And Bezdin, apparently, according to the Dvar Avram, also has miktas melucha. Not the same melucha as a melech, but as far as Hefker, Bezdin Hefker is concerned, Bezdin is operating b'toras surara. And that's why the pasuk says, Sarim uzkenim. Now, he has another possible nafkamina here from these different drashos. And he says that the question is, very fundamental question, how wide or broad is the scope of Hefker, Bezdin, Hefker? For example, he wants to know about what's called ishus of a ketana, which is ishus d'Rabbana. On a doraisa level, a ketana cannot be married without her father. But let's say she has no father, and she's the Yisova Me'aviyah, she can be married off by her mother, by her brothers, whatever it is, there's ishus. Now, what happens when this ketana dies? Who inherits her? Does the normal mechanism of inheritance kick in, which means that her mother in this case would be, or the brothers, you have to know Perikesh Nochlim, but whatever it is, or does her quote unquote husband inherit her? And the Gemara establishes that there's an institution called Yerusha Sabal, the Ishto Aktana, which is derived from Hefker, Bezdin, Hefker. Or, for example, there's one man the Omer in the second paragraph of Metziu holds Simonim Lavdo Raisa. We will return an object to someone who could give Simonim, even if Simonim Lavdo Raisa, and this is based on Hefker, Bezdin, Hefker. Other examples. A man is on his deathbed and he verbally decides where his nechasim will go. There was no kinyan. When he divides up his nechasim, you need a kinyan. But the Rabbanan made a takana, Hefker, Bezdin, Hefker. And many other examples that he has here, which are takanas chachamim mishum Hefker, Bezdin, Hefker. And he says the following, and this is all based on the Avnei Miluim of the K'tzos HaChoshen. And he says, and also the Karen Ora, that if you derive Hefker, Bezdin, Hefker, as the Gemara here in Shekalim does from Ezra, then Hefker, Bezdin, Hefker only applies litzorech sha'ah. the need of the moment. For example, Ezra would confiscate the possessions of those who refused to comply because they were intermarried. Or, as we apply to the case of Kilayim, those who violate deliberately the laws of Kilayim, we're going to confiscate their properties. Later on in Jewish history, we will not do so because we no longer have the Tzorach Shah. Hefker Bezdin Hefker, if derived from the Pasuk in Ezra, does not invest in Bezdin an all-encompassing power over Dini Mamanos that they can make takanos for all generations as to whose mammon will go where and who owns and possesses which mammon. It's only limited to Tzorech HaShah. And that's based on the Pasuk in Ezra. Masha Ein Kain, if you hold like Rabbi Loza, that we derive from the Pasuk in Yoshua, that these are din in Nachlos, and it means that in Nachlos, Bezdin, like a father vis-a-vis his estate, which he can bequeath to any son he chooses, so too Bezdin has rights to decide whose mammon will go where. That means that even if it's lo l'tzorach hashah, for example, you have takanos that we mentioned before about Hashav Saveda and how to divvy up property in the case of Shchiv Meira and the case of Nisui Ketana, who inherits the Ketana when she dies. All this is based on the pasuk of Nachlos in Sefer Yoshua. And what we mentioned before, that different Rishonim fit into different groups as far as which makar, which source for Hefker Bezdin Hefker is going to apply, that's going to really impact on the scope of Hefker Bezdin Hefker. And now I found something really exciting. He says here that there's a major machlokas Rishonim about the following. Does Hefker Bezdin Hefker apply only lafkia mamon? But now that it's Hefker, if you, whoever you are, will want to now acquire ownership, you will have to implement a Masechet Shekalim. And that's one school of thought. Aval adayin eino zocha b'ad sheyachzik. Okay, that's a quote from the Shita Mekubetzes in Bava Basra. It means Hefker Bezdin Hefker. Okay, it's Hefker. But Bezdin doesn't have the right to be makna you and choose someone and say, well, now Ruvain's possessions belong to Shimon. That's one Shita Rishonim. Aval yesh Rishonim shesovrim shekolcho shel Bezdin lafkia momon lazeh ulezakoso lasheni, and automatically to bequeath it to someone else. Af kodim sheboli yodo shel hasheni. This is the Rashba in Gittin, and Rashi in Gittin seems to imply it. Rashbam in Bava Basra, the Ran in Gittin, Shita Mekubetz in Bava Metzia. I mean, there's a whole long footnote. Yeah, if you know the Encyclopedia Talmudit, that's their specialty. In any event, I'm just giving you a little bit of a taste of some of the issues that come up in Hefker Bezdin Hefker. The Rash Misoleo understands that the first issue is whether or not Hefker Bezdin Hefker can undermine the status of Tevel under the halacha of Hefker Potim and Amaisus. And now they could effectuate a Ptur Maser on Tevel, remove these to Tevel, even though they're only vested in this power as a Bezdin. And we say, Ein Koch B'yad Chacham Lakar Dover Min HaTorah. However, there is, in the light of this analysis, another way of explaining the Gemara's vacillation, and that is when the Rabbanan institute Hefker Bezdin Hefker, do they remove the schus of the Levim? When a person takes the initiative and on his own he's mafkir his nechasim. So then the Torah says that this doesn't come under the pasuk of what is it? V'yikru. Sorry, I just got lost in the pasuk that we quoted yesterday. And the Torah says that the Levium will take their meiser, Yotza Zeshu Hefker, which means that anyone could take this. So when it's going, it's being transferred from the Bailim. I'm giving it to the Levium. Then the Levium have rights to Maser. But if it went through Hefker and the Levium don't have special rights because anyone could come along and collect and acquire this Tvua, then the Levium don't get Maser. That's called Hefker. Medvar Mamurim, in one side of Hagemara, that's only with regard to a person being mafkir's own nechasim. But if Bezdin is being mafkir's nechasim, then what happens is that Bezdin is not coming to be mafkia the rights of the Levium by saying now anyone can take it and the Levium cannot take it. Because again, Hefker removes the rights of the Levium to collect this maser, and now Bezdin is not going to go that far. And again, it might depend upon the scope of the powers of Hefker, Bezdin, Hefker. Can they take someone's schuyot? So again, if we go back to Rosh Shah, which we were medayek from many Rishonim that say that in the context of our Yerushalmi, it's a matter of Horat Shah because of the Ovre Avera in Kilayim, or in the case of Ezra and his Kehillah over there. So why should the Levium suffer? You're now going to remove the rights of Levium by doing what? By saying that anyone can collect this Tvua. Oh, no. That goes way beyond Harasha. It's one thing to tell the Bailim that they have no rights to the Tvua. But now to turn to the Olam, non-Levium, and say you have rights to the Tvua, that's not within the purview of the power vested in Bezdin, because now you're removing the schus of the Levi. Was is their shoulder? Well, what Avera did the Levi violate in Kilayim so that we now remove his rights to collect this Tfu? So again, it's not the way the Rash Leo said it, that this is a question of Tevel. How could the Rabbana remove the Isa Tevel? That Koch Chachamim Lakardov and Ator B'Kuva say they don't have. Forget about Tevel. I'm not interested in Tevel. Because once it's Hefker, it's not Tevel. And if Bezdin declares it, it's Hefker. But what power, what authority do Bezdin have in Hefker? The question is not a question of Tevel. It's a question of Hefker. Can they be mafkir the nechasim and remove the Levium's rights to be zoche in mas? And Rabbi Yonason comes along and he says, I have a proof from Ibur Shana. Because there's no Ibur Shana based on a Brisa Masechet Sanhedrin, neither on the 7th year nor on the 8th year. Shemitah, the 7th year, is not a good candidate for Ibur Shana to add an extra month of Adar. Why not? And the answer is because you're imposing too much on the people. They had an Easter. They were prohibited by virtue of the laws of Shvius from working the land. And now you're going to add an extra month of the Easter of working the land. That's already too much. But, says Rabbi Yonason, is there going to be a Chi of Maser? We know that the year of Shvius is Potem in a Maser because everything is Hefker. Now, although the Mishnah says, or the Bryce, I should be more careful, that the Rabbanan are not meant to institute Ibur Shana in the case of Shvius, however, if they went ahead and they violated that prohibition, for whatever reason, then the Shvius is Chal. I'm sorry, the Ibur is Chal, and Shvius is extended by 1 extra month. Is Memela, says Rabbi Yonasan, by extending the year by 1 extra month and giving the Peros the status of Shvius, which is Hefker, they have now removed the Chiyuv Maises. Shvius is Potter Mimasa. When we say Shvius is Potter Mimasa, it means from the beginning of the year till the end of the year, from Rosh Chodesh Tishrei until Chav Tes or Lamed of El. We're not going to cut out a month in the middle and say, well, you know what? There's a chiyuv of Hafashas Maser, and the Levium can come and take Maser during that Adar Sheni. No. The entire year is taken as one entity, and it's Potter Min Hamasos. What power removes the Levi from their Maser in Adar Sheni? And the answer is Bezdin, because Bezdin declared the extra month of Maser Sheni. And in effect, what Bezdin effectuated was Hefker Bezdin Hefker. The Gemara, later on, we're not up to it yet, on Daf Gimel and Beis, is going to attack Rabbi Yonasan and refute his right. But we're going to take a little bit of a digression. And the Gemara wants to know, why does the Brisa say that Bezdin is enjoined from establishing not only the 7th year, the Shemitah year, as an Ibur year, but even the 8th year? I understand the 7th year. You're adding an extra Isur of Nitiya and Zriya and Charisha and all the Malachas and Karka. But what's wrong with the 8th year? So what if we add an extra Adar to the 8th year? Ad Kedon Shvius, but Motzei Shvius Mai. What's the deal with Motzei Shvius, the 8th year? So let's just make sure everyone's on the same page here. We're up to Amar Rabbi Bon. Okay, then, so this would be, I would say, about maybe 15 lines up from the bottom of the Omen. I'm not sure. It's a little bit less than 15. Do you see the first words in the line are Rabbi Bon? I have a feeling that Bon is a short form of Binyamin. It's just my heart tells me. You know, in Yerushalmi, they change names. Shalol Rabos Be'isur Chadash. Okay. Now, what happens? Immediately after Shvius, on the 1st of Tishrei, obviously this is not true because 1st of Tishrei is Rosh Hashanah, but on the first day of Heter Malacha, they go out to the fields and they start planting. And the produce is going to be ready sometime at the end of the winter before Nisan. All that produce is Chadash until the 16th of Nisan. That's when it becomes Yasham. Now, what's going on? The last time that they've worked the field was in the 6th year. 7th year, they didn't work the land. So they have storage, you know, like Yosef and Mitzrayim of produce from the 6th year. They're eating it in the 7th year. Now we're in the 8th year. And now you're telling me that we're going to add an extra month of Isur Chadash because by wedging in Adar Sheni, you're pushing off Tetzayim Ben Nisan by a month. That's really being very harsh by extending the Isur Chadash for another month. Omar Rabbi Bon Shalol Rabos Isur Chadash. Rabbi Zeira B'Shem Rabbi Elazar Hada diat Omar, that din that you have formulated based on the brisa, that we're not going to be ma'aber neither the 7th nor the 8th year, that only applies ad shelo hiter Rebbe lahavi yerek michutz laretz, aval misha hiter Rebbe lahavi yerek michutz laretz, is he shvius, he shar shnei hashavua. Okay. Now, I'm going to interpret this Gemara first and foremost according to the Rash Sarleim. And then, believe nether, we're going to look into the Taklin Chadatin. According to the Rash Sarleim, Rebbe was matir Yerek michutzlarts. Let's understand why initially, before Yerek, before Rebbe was matir, why was there an Isser of Yerek michutzlarts? And this has to do with something called Ofar Chutzlarts Mitame B'maga U'B'masa. The Rabbanan made a gzera that if you have Ofar from Chutzlarets, and we'll see Fusepis who's transporting Ofar from Chutzlarets to Eretz Yisrael, but that Ofar might have bones of a dead body mixed in. And it has a din of tumah as far as mago mas is concerned, not as far as oil is concerned, because for oil you need most of a dead body, and it also could be that there's no tumas oil with regard to a non-Jewish corpse. But as far as mago mas is concerned, it could be that you have an etzem kisaora, a bone that size that's mitami. So they made an absolute zera that ofar chutzlaretz is mitame. So no one was in the import business of importing green beans from chutzlaretz. But Rebbe saw that the people couldn't deal with this. It was much too harsh. There was, well, when there were years of plenty, okay, so we could survive with local Israeli vegetables. But when it became very financially tight in Eretz Yisrael and the rains weren't falling, they didn't have enough food. So because of the shortage of food, Rebbe was matir. You have to know how this squares with the Gemara in Beit Zayin. Maybe there was an original condition in the Gzera of Gush Ofar Michutz Laretz, and Rebbe was mat. Now, when they took vegetables and they uprooted them, then inevitably some of the vegetables, when you uproot them, they have a Gush Ofar, and therefore the original Iser enjoined us from having here in Eretz Yisrael vegetables from Chutz La'aretz. No one was importing vegetables from Chutz La'aretz because it was metabed. At that point, it was necessary to institute a prohibition against Ibur Shana, Bishvius, or for that matter, even Bishminis, because since we were totally dependent upon local produce here in Eretz Yisrael, then by adding an extra month of Adar, whether it's Shvius as far as the Isser of Avodas HaKarka or Shminis as far as Chodesh is concerned, you are superimposing too heavy of a burden on the shoulders of the local residents of Eretz Yisrael. Therefore, don't do it. Don't add an extra month of Adar to make it even more difficult for the people of Israel. However, says Rabbi Zeira, now that Rebbe was matir, we're not in such bad straits. We are like in years of plenty, because even in the absence of local produce, we can rely on imported produce that comes from Chutz La'aretz, because Rebbe was matir the Gzera of Gush Ofar with regard to Yerakos. Now, when we say Yerakos, how much more so Zerayim? which is a real problem of Shvius and Chadash. The real Isur Chadash is not Yerakos. That's already D'Rabbanan. And Rebbe was matir, and that alleviated this very difficult situation. And now, go ahead, carte blanche. You have the green light to be ma'aber the shana in Shvius and in Shminis. Ad kan the Rash Misarleh. Now, we'll take a look at the Taklin Chadatin. Now, I don't know what Gemaras you have in front of you. In the Mesifta, they published the Taklin Chadatin. It's a Talmud of the Vilna Gaon on the page itself. And he says the following. So first, I'm going to read to you a paragraph that starts Lo B'Shvius. And he writes, Lefisha Marichin Aleim Isur Avodas HaKarka, by adding an extra month of Adar. They're extended the Isur Avodas HaKarka. Listen to what he says. V'lo yimtzu me'ayin lahavi ha'omer u'shtei alechem. The whole issue here is not about financial considerations and making it difficult for the shoulders of the Israelites to bear that response, that heavy gzera of an extra month, but rather we're going to have such a dearth of local produce that we might not have barley for the Omer and wheat for the Shtei Alechem. But now that Rebbe was matir Yerakos from Chutz La'aretz, so now I'm skipping a few lines to get to the punchline. He Shvius means, this is the language of Rabbi Zeira, that now we can be ma'aber the Shana Shvius. He says, now mutar li'abish arei yecholim lahavi tvua michutz la'aretz. Right, that Rebbe was now matir not only yibu, what we call, right, import of Yerakos, but also import of grains. Oh, we now have a perfect supply of grains coming from whatever countries surround Israel. And therefore, we don't have to use up our local grains. Now, it's very important that he adds the word tzvichim, because during the year of Shemitah, we're not allowed to work the land. Where are we going to get Sa'orim for Omer and Chitim for Shtei Alechem? The answer is from Tzvichim. Tzvichim means that which grows on its own without Avodas HaKarka. And we're not going to use that up, because not in the 7th year for sure, and not even in the 8th year, because we have ample supply after Rebbe's heter of grains and Yerakos coming in from Chutz La'aretz. So therefore, Yimtza Lahavia Omer Shtei Alechem, there's plenty of local produce for the Omer and the Shtei Alechem. Fascinating. I mean, it's a whole nother shot in the Gemara. We were so influenced by the Rash Leo, who predates the Taklin Chadatin by, I don't know, 150 years. And he says that let's read the next piece of Gemara, because once again, he has a whole new shot. The Gemara says that Tani, we learned in a brisa, and that was the brisa that we quoted earlier from Masechet Sanhedrin. Ein ma'abrin. I'll just add a little bit to the text here. Lo b'shana shvius v'lo b'shana shminis. Omar Rabbi Mana hadadi at Omar. That din that you formulated, that you derived from the brisa in Sanhedrin, that there's no Ibershon in Shvius, that's only Barishona. What's Barishona? The early time period. Shahayu Ashanim Kitikana Kitiknam. Aval achshav she'ein hashanim kitiknam. He shvius. He sharsha yimei shnei hashavua. The din of shvius, and for that matter shminis as well, is identical with the din of any other year in the cycle, and therefore allowed to be ma'am. Where is this Rabbi Mana coming from? I mean, we just finished saying that this halacha depends upon Rebbe, pre-Rebbe, or post-Rebbe. There's no need for Rabbi Mana to Ibachaza to review and repeat exactly what we just learned from Rabbi Zeira. And not only that, the language is totally different. He doesn't speak about Rebbe and importing Yerakas from Chutz La'aretz. He speaks about Rishona, Hayushanim Kitikna, Achshav Ein Hashanim Kitikna. So what's going on? So first, we're going to approach this Gemara of Rabbi Mana from the perspective of one of the Mefarshim, Rabbeinu Meshulam. Again, as I told you, we have today access to Rishonim, manuscripts that we didn't have access to for hundreds and hundreds of years. He says the following: Barishona means the Yemei Bayis, when the Beis HaMikdash stood. The Akshav means after the Churban. Okay, pretty creative. What's it got to do with Iber Shana in Shmias and Shminis? So he says the following. This is so counterintuitive. He says, Kishav Beis HaMikdash Hayakayam, Hayu Yisrael Muchzakim Bad Masam. We had sovereign rule over the land, which is, by the way, not always true during Bayis Sheni, but during certain periods anyway. V'lo hayoroi lanu la'aber k'dei lo lesar alemes avodas karka chodesh nosaf aval achshav bizman hazeh she'ein beis hamikdash kayam v'ha'aretz itachas yidei nachrim v'atvua mitzuya tamid. Interesting. So counterintuitive. Once we forfeit our sovereignty after the Churban Abayis, we've got plenty of ample food. Why? Because, meaning that which grows under the control of the Goyim is not Osir V'Shvius. So just go to your local market and buy whatever supplies of food you need. When the Beis HaMikdash was alive and well, and the Isur Avodas Karka during Shvius was in full. There was no availability of food, and therefore to add an extra month of, let's say in the case of Shvius, of Isur Avodas Karka, in the case of Shminis of Chadash, Isur Chadash, that's too much of an imposition. But now that we're after the Churban, and the land is beyond Nachrim, then he says, Hatvua Mitzuya Tamid, we have freehand, limitless access to Tvua. And we don't have to worry about an extra Isur or an extra imposition of Shvius or Chodesh. I don't know. To me, it sounds very odd, that Dafka, because the Goyim took over and we're under their sovereign control, now we can extend the year by an extra month, whether it's Shvius or Shminis, because we've got an ample supply of Tvu. Very creative, very new. I just don't know if that's the intuitive, if that's simple reading of the Gemara. So I want to read to you the Taklid Chadatim, Talmud of the Gaon. He says the following. Shahayu Shanim Kitikunam, that this prohibition about Iber Shana, Shanim Kitikunam, Shahaya Hatvua Maheres Lizbashel ad Nisan. No mention of the Beis Hamikdash. He says that in the original period of time, the land was producing mimaheres at a very fast pace. And now you've got grains, vegetables, and they're also mishum chadash. Let's take Shminis for a minute. Umameheres l'sbashel, even before we get to Nisan, which is the key month to be matir chadash, we got wonderful perils. What are we going to do with that? He says, "Ma she'en kein achshav she'en hashonim kitikunam v'ein atfur b'maheres l'sbashel ad echad b'nisan." We lose nothing by adding an extra month because the produce is still immature. It's not ripened yet. It's not edible. So you lose nothing by adding an extra month. Now, in the case of Shvius, Shonim Kitikunam. So what does that mean? Is what? Yotza Nisan v'Yod Yishim Klola. So it says Roy Lechel. He's focused here on Chadash. This whole discussion is about Chadash. Yeah, I'm not sure how the Taklin Chadatin is going to interpret this Gemara of Rabbi Mana with regard to Shvius. Maybe he's only learning he Shvius, meaning Shminis is like Shvius. He Shar Shnei Hashavua has the same din. No, it says he Shvius. So wait a minute. In Shvius, if the Tvua is Mameres, so then I see. Maybe he's talking about harvest. I think that since the Tvua is Mameres Lizbashel, so if you prohibit avodas karka for another month, by postponing the harvest for another month, you're going to lose your produce. In fact, that's the Gemara Moed Katan as far as Chol Moed is concerned. That if the harvest is not done on time, then the fruits and the grains get ruined in the field. But today, he says Achshav, maybe because we have this klola, but Einam Averes L'Spashil. Therefore, by postponing the avodas hakarka for one extra month, we're not going to lose any. Tani, the Brisa records that Shel Beis Rabban Gamliel Ibrua b'motzai shvius miyad. I get the impression that Rabban Gamliel already lived at the time post Rebbe when they were matir Yerakos from Chutz La'aretz, or during this period of time of Churban HaBeis HaMikdash, and they were under the sovereignty of the Goyim, or if you take the third approach, it means that during Rabbi Gamliel's time, the fruits were growing at a very slow rate, and therefore there was no extension of the Yisur Chodesh by adding an extra month of Adar. In any event, what they did at the time of Rabbi Gamliel and the Brisa testifies to that effect is immediately after Shavuos, on the third day of Tishrei, on Tzom Gedalia. I'm just giving that as an example. They were ma'aber the shana. They already notified the people that there's going to be an extra Adar. And that's not a problem because they're not extending the Isur Chadash, let's say if it's after the het of Rebbe, because there's plenty of import of vegetables, etc., from Chutzlar. Omar Rabbi Avun in Min Hadah. Now, Rabbi Abun is going back and addressing Rabbi Yonasan. Can you prove Hefker Bezdin Hefker from the law of Shvius? Correct? Did I get the names right? That's Rabbi Yonasan. Yeah. Rabbi Yonasan said that if we're going to remove the rights of the Levian from the Tvua of Shvius by adding an extra month of Adar, so during that month of Adar, once Bezdin is Ma'aber the Shana, now the Peros of Shvius are Hefker, hence the Levium have no right to these fruits, because as we said, the entire year is one entity, and if you add an extra Adar, and it has all the laws of Shvius, which means there's a Ptur of Masros. In Min Hadah, which translates here into Hebrew as Imra Yascha Mi Hadah, from this, meaning from this brisa in Sanhedrin, that there's no rights to the Bezdin to be Ma'aber the Shana in Shvius, right? Les at shma mino klum. Very harsh language, which means that you can't learn anything here. In other words, this brisa, as far as Iber Shana in Shvius, is not going to give you any insight into Hefker Bezdin Hefker, whether it's part of an Amasa or not part of an Amasa. And why is that so? I love this Gemara. This next piece of Gemara, I'm very excited about, because I think I finally understand the Yerushalmi. He says, Shomer es Chodesh Ha'aviv. I'll read the end of the pasuk. I think it's a Parshas Re'eh. Yasisa Pesach Hashem Elokecha, Ki b'Chodesh Ha'aviv Hotziach Hashem Elokecha miMitzrayim Laila. And what do we derive from this Chodesh Ha'aviv? Shomreu Sheyaviu Bechidusho. The language is very heavy, but basically, this is a quintessential explanation for why there's an institution called Iber Shana. First step is, why do we add an extra month of Adar? And the answer is because there's a discrepancy between the solar calendar and the lunar calendar. And basically, Chodesh Aviv, which is the time for Siso Pesach Hashem Elokecha, is dependent upon the solar calendar, not on the lunar calendar. So now Bezdin, in order to make sure when we fall behind in the lunar calendar, because the discrepancy is, I used to know this by heart, but I forgot. It's I think on an annual basis, it's a discrepancy of how many days? 5? Okay. Anyway,
11 days.
11 days. 11 days discrepancy, right? So times 3 is a month. So he says, Al Bezdin Lidog Uvil Lishmar Shechodesh Nisan Shalachama, right? The solar year, Bitkufas Nisan Shalachama, Yachul Bishas Chidesh Halavana Shal Chodesh Nisan. Right? So the word Chodesh has 2 meanings to it. It's a month, but it also means Chidush. And Chidush is referring to the Levana, right? The Levana is Mischadeshes every month. So we have to make sure that the Chidush of Chodesh, meaning of the month of Nisan, should guarantee that it is aligned with the Tkuf of Aviv, that Chodesh Nisan should be what we call Tkufas Nisan, and that is what we call the spring equinox, etc., etc., so that now during Chodesh Nisan, we're going to celebrate Pesach 15 days later during the Aviv. And for that, we have to add an extra month of Adar to postpone Rosh Chodesh Nisan, so that Rosh Chodesh Nisan will coincide not only with the Levana, but more importantly with the Chama. Not sure if that's my phone. Maybe I forgot to show them. Okay. He says, L'tzorach zeh ma'abrim es hashon. Okay, wonderful. We just got a crash course in Ibur Shon. I mean, Ibur Shon is way more complicated than what we just said. Masechet Sanhedrin. Oh, so now what does this have to do with the price of fish in China? And we know that by adding an extra month Adar to Chodesh, to Shvi'is, Shana Shvi'is, you're going to remove the rights of the Levi. So don't we see here that the power invested in Bezdin to be Ma'aber the Shana is enough to generate a p'tur of Masros, meaning of Hefker, name. The Torah itself is mandating Bezdin to be Ma'aber the Shana by telling us B'chodesh ha'aviv Asisa Pesach Hashem Elokech. This is not a decision on the part of Bezdin to punish a transgressor, a violator of the law, whatever law it is, let's say Kalayim. No. That's not what's going on over here. What's going on over here is the Torah is telling us to establish an extra month of Adar in order to guarantee that Chodesh HaAviv is the Chodesh Nisan of Pesach, that Pesach falls out in Chodesh Aviv. So the Torah itself is commanding the Bezdin to be Ma'aber the Shana. This is not a decision on the part of Bezdin. Now, according to the Rash Leo, it's beautiful. Because you remember that the Rash Leo said that the Gemara was vacillating about Hefker Bezdin Hefker, because how could they be Mafkia Tevel Doraisa? And if Rabbi Yonasan came to answer that question by quoting the Brisa in Sanhedrin about Ibur Shana, well, Ibur Shana is a Doraisa. So what the Bezdin is doing in that case is they just implementing the mandate of the Torah to guarantee that Pesach and Chodesh Nisan is beyond it. So therefore, Rabbi Yonasan, if you want to prove that Yesh Koch Biad Chachamim by instituting a Hefker Bezdin Hefker to remove Tevel and generate a P'tur Master so that the Levi is now nixed from the P'tur, you haven't succeeded in doing so because Ibur Shana is Doraisa. Okay, that's really good, according to the Rash Lev. But what would we say if we took the alternative approach to this Gemara? That the difference between Hefker, when a person's Mafker is Nechosin, and Hefker Bezdin Hefker has to do with the very essence of Hefker. I think the answer is posh and very fundamental. What Ibur Shana is, that's not an act of being Mafker, the Nechosin. Ibur Shana means expanding the year itself. The Torah mandates the Bezdin to expand the year. If it's the 7th year, it's Shvi'is. So now you have an extra month of Shvi'is. Well, what are the dinim of Shvi'is? Shvi'is is Hefker and Potim in Amas. It's not that Bezdin is invested with the authority to remove the Levim from their rights to this Tvur. That's not what's happening. What's happening is that we're expanding the year, and Memela it's Shvi'is. And if it's Shvi'is, the law of Shvi'is is that the payros are all Hefker. Anyone can come and take. That doesn't prove a thing about Hefker Bezdin Hefker. When Bezdin are being mafkir someone's nechosim, I don't know if Bezdin has the authority, therefore, to undermine the rights of the Levim. This is our alternative to the Rashmi Misolea. But in a case of Ibur Shana, specifically in Shvi'is, Bezdin are not exercising their powers and authorities to be mafkir someone's nechosim. That's not what's going on over here. Bezdin is entitled and mandated to reconcile any sort of discrepancy between the lunar calendar and the solar calendar in order to guarantee that Nisan will be b'chodesh ha'aviv. In the case of Shvi'is, What that means is you've expanded the year of Shvius. That's not Hefker Bezin Hefker. Do you see, Rabbosai, where we're avoiding this? Again, I'm not who am I to question the Rashmi or Leo, but I'm just saying we don't have to distinguish here between Doraisas and Rabbanans and Iber Shana's Doraisa, whereas Hefker Bezin Hefker is only Rabbanan. Forget about all that. What we're talking about is, are we operating with Hefker Bezin Hefker? And the answer is no. In the case of Shvius, that's not an operation of Hefker Bezin Hefker. Okay, I see we ran out of time, but that's pretty much the end of the sugya. So that's what we have for today. So Mitzvah Shem, tomorrow we'll be able to finish up here. There's just 2-3 lines here on Gimel and Aleph, and we'll pick it up from V'haida Omadah. Haida Omadah. It's the whole language of the Yishalmi is Pashut Chinese. I tell you, part of the challenge of learning Shekalim is just being exposed to another. It's like a different shas, it's language and different, to figure. And we're looking at the commentaries that I have to admit I was never exposed to these commentaries. It's like a whole new cadre of commentaries. Okay, then. All right, wishing everyone a great day.